Now we're going to cut the timing belt. And here you have it, folks. Here's a look at our original timing belt on this car. Again, this thing has 110,000 miles on it. I think these are actually, they last quite a bit. I've heard them lasting up to 150,000+ miles, but nonetheless, it should be replaced. Because again, it's not just the timing belt, it's also the tensioner and the roller bearings that could go bad as well. And here, as you can hopefully hear. All right, so out they come. And the tensioner's got, looks like 2 or 3 bolts holding it in. And here we go. There's also a dust boot right here that you need to save, this guy. All right, next up, our water pump. And our water pump is held in all around the circumference by these 12mm bolts, these studs. Also these 2 10mm bolts up here that go through the thermostat housing as well. First, I'll loosen them. All right, next, in order to get the water pump out, we need to get this thermostat housing out of the way. And in order to get this out of the way, we're gonna need to remove our ignition coil on this side as well. There's one 10mm bolt that's holding this ignition coil in. Actually, there's 2 10mm bolts. And then this housing is RTV to the water pump on this side, and then also on that side, it's got an O-ring. There we go. Here's the O-ring that needs to be replaced, and here's the RTV stuff that you need to reapply. And now we should be able to push out on the water pump and loosen it first. There you go, have your catch can ready. Also on this engine, be very careful with your pry bars and screwdrivers and whatever you decide to use to stick behind the water pump, because this is an aluminum engine and these can really scratch it up and damage it. And then we'll try to pry open from the bottom as well. There we go. All right, I think we can pull this out. All right, so let's look at the water pump out of the car. Now these water pumps from the factory do not use a gasket. They have a groove all around that you can see that you'll need to fill in with RTV silicone. So yeah, pretty much what we'll need to do next is to clean up this mating surface. We're only gonna use a razor blade. We're not gonna use a roll-off disc or any kind of abrasive pad, because again, this is an aluminum block and you run the risk of digging into it a little more than you need to. Now, even with the razor blade, you need to make sure that you keep that razor blade flat to the mating surface, and you don't start digging into the metal. All right, so here's what we have after about 20-25 minutes of cleaning, and as you can see, the contact surface is quite clean. Now, you might be able to again see just a little bit of the remnants of the RTV, but if you can't feel it with your fingernails, then it's fine. One other thing I recommend you do is to siphon out some of the coolant that's in these passages with the turkey baster or whatever you have at your disposal, because this is going to drip on here, and then when you go to put the new water pump with the RTV silicone on, then it can potentially ruin your RTV. Also, you need to get some shop air and remove any coolant or brake clean or whatever you use in the bolt holes as well. All right, next we get our bolts for our water pump ready. As you can see, I got the old paper towel in a socket trick with that extension ready to go so that I can only use one hand. All right, next you get your new O-ring and slip it on this coolant hose. Make sure you get some coolant or soapy water on it so that your water pump can slide on easier. All right, next it's time to put our RTV on our new water pump before we put it on. As you can see, you need to put RTV in all these grooves all around it. Now, Toyota sells an RTV silicone called the FIPG, basically stands for Form in Place Gasket. Now, the one for the water pump, I think is about 80 bucks. So I'm gonna use a much cheaper one. This is the red RTV gasket maker by Permatex, and this should do just fine. You just gotta remember, you only have 5 minutes after you apply this to put the water pump on the engine. And I think that should do it. Doesn't look pretty, but we'll get the job done. All right, so as we put it on, we'll line this up first. Make sure we get this wiring harness out of the way. Then we'll line up the hole to the stud on that side. Then we'll slide this in slowly. Then get it on this pipe up here. Now we grab one of our bolts, put it on this one. So you want to hand tight these first, and then after about an hour, you torque them down to manufacturer torque specifications, which is 13 foot-pounds. Also, you should go without saying, make sure you clean up the threads on your bolts. Now we're waiting on that. We're going to clean our thermostat housing. Similar to our water pump, there's a groove here where you put our TV silicone. So we're going to use a pick to completely clean it out. You guessed it, it's going to be a bit of a pain. All right, so actually that wasn't too bad. We got it pretty clean. Next, we'll replace its O-ring as well. Again, dip it in coolant. Wipe down this area where we're going to put the RTV silicone, also air dry it. All right, same RTV action here. All right, let's see if we can do this without screwing up our RTV. I think we got it. And we'll hand tighten these as well. All right, now while we wait for that to dry, we're going to start installing our timing components. We're going to first actually remove this rocker arm and of course do some cleaning here. Oh no, we lost our mark on our crankshaft. But that won't be a problem because there are marks here for top dead center. Obviously, there's a notch on the crankshaft gear and then there's a dot on the engine side where you need to line them up to be at top dead center. Next, we grab our new tensioning roller, put our bolt through. And there's also a thick washer that goes in the back. Don't forget that. And also don't forget to clean and apply some blue thread locker to the threads. And then run it down by hand. And then we'll torque it down to 25 foot-pounds. Making sure this can move back and forth freely. And next, our timing belts roller. Again, thread locker on the threads, and this one gets torqued down to 25 foot-pounds as well. There. All right, now quickly, let me touch up on where I got the parts for this timing belt job. You always want to get OE parts, obviously. And I got the water pump directly from Toyota, or Lexus in our case. And then I got a timing belt kit from Rock Auto. The timing belt kit is made by Aisin. Now, Aisin is the OE manufacturer or supplier for a lot of Toyota, Honda, and Subaru parts. And funny thing is now, I got the water pump at the Toyota dealership for 110 bucks, where an aftermarket, let's say a Napa water pump would have been 150 bucks. So I got the OE water pump for cheaper than an aftermarket one. Then I also got the OE timing belt kit from Rock Auto for a lot less than it would have been to get it directly from Toyota. So just to give you an idea, if you can shop around, you can save a lot of money and still get OE quality parts put in your car. All right, so it's an hour later. We're ready to torque these down. Again, it's 13 foot-pounds. There's 1, 2. Same goes for our thermostat housing. All right, next it's time to put on our timing belts. It's going to be pretty easy. As you can see, we haven't installed our tensioner yet so that we can push this all the way in and have enough room here to easily put on our timing belt. The plan is to first start at your crank. You go around this guy, the roller, and you come up here. There's going to be marks on the timing belt that I'll show you in a minute. And then run this under the water pump to the one on this side. Then around this, around that tensioning roller, and back to the crankshaft, obviously. And you want to do this, again, without the crankshaft moving. As I mentioned, there are timing marks on the crankshaft and the engine, and also notches on the camshaft that I've marked with my white marker, and the back timing belt cover, and that's on both sides. So yeah, here are the timing marks that I told you about. There's one for the right cam, left cam, and then there's one for the crankshaft as well. All right, so with the timing marks, this is going to be kind of easy, but even without the timing marks, or in fact for me, it would be easier without the timing marks because I would just throw it on the way it's supposed to be, not being concerned about timing marks. But since we're doing a video, we're going to line up the timing mark. I've already marked the front of the belt as to where the arrow is so I can line it up with the crankshaft gear where I've also marked to the front. Then from there, we're going to go around this roller and come up here to our driver's side camshaft, where the left side camshaft mark doesn't even line up. Yeah, the mark is way down here. It's supposed to be up here. So there you have it. Now we have to do it our way, which is basically you get this taut, make sure there's just minimal tension. I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of slack, but this is just very minimal amount of slack. This is just normal. So while keeping this taut, you go under the water pump and up and around this passenger side camshaft. Put that in. Again, make sure you have just minimal amount of slack. And then you slide it over this tensioning roller. So now when we install our tensioner here and pull the pin, it's going to apply tension to the slack that we have brought all the way over here. Removing the slack, and then we'll put the crankshaft bolt in. We're going to rotate it 2 times, double check our marks, and if all the timing marks line up, we're good to go. All right, so here's our tensioner. We get it in place, then get some thread locker on the bolts. And these get torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. And actually, just by installing our tensioner, we removed a lot of slack, where I don't think we need to pull that pin in order to test our timing. So we'll grab our harmonic balancer and slide it on and get our crank bolt, run it down. And then we're going to rotate the engine, 2 full crank rotations. In other words, we'll rotate it until the marks on our camshafts line up, and then we'll check all the other marks. Now, I should have probably tried the timing bolt the other way. Maybe the marks would have lined up that way, but who cares? Not necessary. And okay, we're about to line up right there. There's the left-hand side camshaft. As you can see, the timing mark on the camshaft and the back cover line up. Here are the marks on the driver's side. You can see they also line up here as well. And here are the marks on the crankshaft. Now, this might be hard to see, but there's the notch right there, right before the timing belt, and then there's a mark right above it. And those, as you can see, are lining up as well. All right, now before we forget, we're going to pull this pin. So yeah, again, as far as why the timing marks aren't lining up, don't know, don't care, don't want to find out either. It doesn't matter. It could be a problem with the manufacturer putting the marks wrong. Maybe we're putting the bolts the other way around, but it doesn't matter. As long as you know how to time an engine, you could time any engine and get around these problems. I guess these marks are for people that are new at this, aren't so experienced. They can kind of check their work. But then again, if the marks aren't correctly, you're kind of stuck. Yeah, you just got to keep in mind, out of the factory, how did they time the engine? How was the first timing bolt by a manufacturer or the factory worker put on the engine? There had to be marks. You just have to find them and line them up and go from there. All right, now before we start putting things back together, I'm going to answer a question that you've been asking. Some of you have been asking, and that is, how do you know where everything goes when it's time to put things back together? And the answer is easy. You got to plan ahead. So as you take them off, if you have room, you put them on a bench, of course. If you don't, you put them next to the car, and you remove them, and you place them in the order you take them off. So that was the first things we took off. Then we went underneath the car to drain the coolant. We removed the splash shield, the hoses, the fan, etc. And we worked our way up here. All right, so let's get everything back together. First, we're actually going to remove our harmonic balancer. Then we'll slide this guy on. Then get this lower timing belt cover on. And now, hopefully one last time, we can slide on our harmonic balancer. And by the way, we're in time, more confirmation. Then we're going to torque it down to manufacturer torque specifications. All right, now this top ignition coil. That will do it. Ooh, one thing that I almost forgot is this cover that slides in place right down here. All right, next it's time to put on our fan housing, and this guy goes on like this. And there's this long bolt that goes down here. Now, I don't know the torque spec for these. If I had to guess, I would say 25. All right, next we're going to install our ignition coil. As you may remember, 10 millimeter bolt on one side and a 14 millimeter bolt on the back side. All right, next we'll install the tensioner for our serpentine belt. We're still going to tighten these by hand. And up we go to install our AC compressor and our alternator. So first, the AC compressor. We can get one bolt started. The rest should go easier. Actually, for this rear one, we'll pull this, the old paper towel on the socket trick again. All right, so here's on the alternator side. Should be able to just get this guy lined up. There we go. If I remember correctly, this bolt went like this. Then we'll torque him down. And then there's this bracket for the transmission. oil cooler lines. And next we'll install the splash shield. All right, now a couple of pointers before we go any further. One is this wiring harness. This one goes to your crankshaft position sensor. Make sure you put it through that side of the, or the inside of the water pump, not underneath it, because it will get pinched by the AC compressor. The other one is that don't accidentally put this stud that goes through your water pump here on this side. This stud only goes on that side, and a bolt that holds your timing belt cover here on this side will hold your water pump to the engine. Also, you might want to let the RTV cure for 24 hours or at least overnight before adding coolant to the engine. Also, after installing the water pump, it's a pretty good idea to put the radiator hoses back on and reconnect whatever coolant hoses you disconnected, and then pressure test the system to make sure the water pump is not leaking, because if it is, you know, if you find out after you put everything back together, you have to do the job again, and this is not a very easy job. The only problem is I don't have the adapter for my cooling system pressure tester kit to test the system, but I'm fairly confident that this will hold and we're not going to have any leaks. All right, next we're going to install our distributor housing and our distributor. Luckily these are marked. They're pretty self-explanatory. This goes right here. There are dowel pins that you need to line up. Now we tighten up. Here comes the distributor itself. This one you need to pay attention and line this notch up with the corresponding area on the camshaft. It's right underneath in our case, and this will click into place. You can just put it on and then spin it, and then there, just went in right there. Just got to be mindful and line it up correctly. Then we'll run these in by hand. You're not going to use power tools for these, and then we'll just snug them up. If I had to guess the torque for these, it'd probably be like 6 foot-pounds or so. Then the distributor itself. Turns out you need to do as I say, not as I do. All right, same thing on this side. First, the distributor housing. Next to the distributor itself, again, we line up this one with the camshaft right there. That's it. And then very gingerly tighten these bolts. Next we'll install our spark plug wires. Here's the left side and here's the right side. All right, next up, this upper timing belt cover on this side. As you may remember, this connector for our camshaft position sensor on this side goes through here. So we'll slide that on through first, then through the grommet. Then we'll push the grommet through. Put this cover on, being mindful of these seals and gaskets. Then we'll install the bolts. There's a bracket down here that one of these bolts will go through, and this last bolt is way down here. Next we'll reconnect these connectors. They kind of fall in place by themselves. That one goes up there, this one down here. I believe this camshaft one, if I remember correctly, goes through a little plastic wire holder thingy that you guys probably can't see down here, and then slides on to here like that, and this connector goes on like that. Also, this plastic holder will go into the cover. Also, let's not forget our water hoses and this one as well. Next comes the right side timing belt cover, and this one, here's our camshaft position sensor, will go through right there. So there, we'll slide the grommet on. So this is the bolt I was telling you about. It goes up here, and it actually goes through your water pump, which is, let's say, an interestingly designed system. And then there's 3 smaller bolts as well. So yeah, you gotta remember to torque this to 13 foot-pounds as well. All right, next, our serpentine belt roller. Next comes the thermostat. Then these 2 nuts. Going with 13 foot-pounds for these as well. It's probably a little less actually, since this is a plastic housing. All right, next comes the fan shroud. Then comes the battery tray. We're actually running ahead of ourselves a little bit. We're gonna do the valve covers next. And then this little guy. All right, then we'll grab and get this piece back in. All right, now we should be able to get this on. And next comes our air filter housing. Be mindful of the connector for the MAP sensor. Here's our connector. All right, next the cover on this side. This slides on this vacuum line. Then there's also a rubber grommet that you'll need to line up with this notch. Next we'll put this cover on. And put this connector back on. So we'll run down the nuts by hand first. Next we'll get our serpentine bolts back on. And then with our serpentine belt tensioner, we apply some tension to the belt and tighten down these bolts, or rather nuts. All right, next we'll put this lower radiator hose back on. Also, don't forget to put these air lines. Same goes for these vacuum lines up here. And we'll get these clamps back on here. Then this upper hose. Then we'll install this guy up here. All right, so pretty much all that's left is to throw the battery back on, go underneath, put the drain valve back on the radiator, put the lower radiator hose back on as well, and put coolant in it. Then we should be ready to start it. But like I said, we're gonna wait overnight for the RTV to cure properly, or fully I should say, and then do that tomorrow morning. All right, folks, so it's the next day, and I just added coolant to the system. Basically, the way you wanna do this on this engine is you undo this bleeder screw, then you add coolant until it starts coming out of that, or until it starts going down very slowly. And you tighten that back up, and then you start the car, get it to operating temperature, add coolant if necessary, so on and so forth. So yeah, after that we're gonna put it on the lift, and from underneath we're gonna double and triple check and make sure we have no coolant leaks from our water pump, and also make sure we haven't caused any new leaks. And then if all checks out, we're done. Oh, and of course, make sure you turn on your heater. So far, so good. So yeah, there you can probably hear the air injection pump that we covered in the previous video, but everything else checks out fine. Our coolant is going down a little bit, but we got no misfires, no funny noises, engine isn't shaking. So yeah, all that checks out. Now we're just gonna wait till we get it to operating temperature and make sure we have no leaks. All right, so 30 minutes later, we're fully warmed up, and here's a look from underneath. There's our tensioner. Our timing belt isn't too far up from that. As you can see, we have no evidence of a leak anywhere around here. Then there's our lower timing belt cover. Then here's the look from this side. Can't see any coolant. Nothing on this side as well. So yeah, last but not least, the splash shield. All right, so there's that, but what are my thoughts on the Zippy Zappy? That's right, we're giving it a nickname. My opinion, this thing gets an A. So as you probably saw, we had no problem using this to get into very tight places and removing bolts and fasteners and whatnot. This also was very fast, so it saved time as well that way. Also, you probably noticed that by using the trigger, we could tighten the fasteners and make sure we don't over torque or damage the threads on the, the smaller bolts like the 8mm or the 10mm bolts. But yeah, I guess the only downside, can't really call it a downside given the size of this thing, was that it couldn't remove some of the 12mm and bigger bolts just by the impacting mechanism, and I had to first do it by hand. But yeah, as one would imagine, that's just simply a trade-off of having a tiny air ratchet, not having enough power. But again, it's fast, it's got an impacting mechanism. Also, AirCat makes an average size air ratchet with impacting mechanism and also a pretty high RPM that has a much higher foot-pound rating. So I might look into that as well. So yeah, if you're interested in this tool or any other tools you see me use in my videos, I'll put links to where you can find them in the description box and also the comment section. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell notification, and give this video a thumbs up. And in the meantime, check out my other videos. Links on this side of the screen, in the suggestion box, and also below again in the description box as well. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.